haven't given this much thought and you're doing event marketing or field marketing, like you're exhibiting at big conferences, you can do a spectacular job at this big national conference and build great affinity with this person over the course of 2 or 3 days. And it could be because you did a booth, it could be because you spoke at a session or gave a keynote, or it could be that you sponsored a really nice cocktail party or a networking dinner or a golf tournament or something like that. And that's all awesome, but just recognize that that touch point counts for one touch point. Maybe if you did 2 or 3 independent things at the conference, maybe they count for 2 or 3, but there's still going to be 24, 25, 26 interactions that prospect or client is going to have with someone in between when they start researching and when they ultimately make a purchase decision. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, and I am thrilled to welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about all over the data center ecosystem, literally all over the planet, regardless of whether you're part of a data center operator like hyperscale, colocation, wholesale, edge, or modular, or maybe you're part of an enterprise data center, or perhaps you're from a technology or a facilities related company that sells to or partners with data centers, or maybe you do something related to construction or real estate or raising capital in and around the data center industry, or perhaps your company does something directly related to outsourced sales and marketing for data centers, critical facilities, or digital infrastructure. And it doesn't matter where you are on the go-to-market team. You may work in sales, marketing, account management, product, channel partnerships, or perhaps you're the executive sponsor, you're in a leadership role, you're the orchestra conductor, getting everyone to collaborate and align well together to power your company's growth aspirations in and around the data center ecosystem. If you want to make sure that you're notified when upcoming educational events and resources like this are available, make sure that you're subscribed to our weekly email newsletter that comes to your email inbox on Sundays. You can subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on our website at www.dcsmi.com. And if you're watching this live, make sure to chime in the comments and let us know where you're joining us from and what you do in the data center industry. So what is on the agenda for today's live show? First, we're going to start by talking about how to build a community and events business for data center investment, operations, and management professionals. After that, we'll turn our attention to how to get data center relocation decision makers to respond without needing a warm introduction. After that, we'll look at how to market and sell data center construction projects. Following that, we'll have our quick halftime break with a message from our sponsor. And then when we return, we'll look at how to reposition data center sales reps as consultants throughout the entire buyer's journey, throughout the entire sales cycle. Then we'll talk about how to market and sell IT asset disposition, ITAD, as well as data center relocation and related data center infrastructure services. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream, we'll look at how a colocation and network services company can generate more channel partner leads. So first up, how can we build a community and events business for data center investment, operations, and management professionals? That's a fantastic question. And the reason why this can be so challenging for so many businesses is when you look at 3 different kinds of buyer personas that your events and media company services, how much do investment, operations, and management professionals have in common within the data center industry? More than likely, quite a bit when you go and you do your actual buyer persona research. And by actual, you need to interview or survey or look at actual representative stakeholders in each of those segments. It's not enough to just talk about this internally with people that have been in your industry a long time. You need to get their own words from data center investment professionals, data center ops professionals, data center management professionals. And in an ideal scenario, you're getting these own words because you're doing face-to-face interviews. The second best scenario is doing video interviews. The third best scenario, if you're not able to do either of those, is you can look at doing things like surveys with some qualitative answers where they write in their answers about things like their biggest goals, their challenges, what's frustrating them most, what are they struggling most with, what caused them to want to prioritize attending the most recent event, how do they navigate the decision-making process where they hang out online and offline. So you get the consensus on not only who they are, but what they actually care about and how they behave. And that consensus in their own words, not what you think those words are, but what those words actually are. So besides surveys, another great way to glean this information is to look at a stack of LinkedIn profiles from a representative group of 5, 10, 15, 20 people in each of those segments and look for the consensus on how they describe themselves, how they describe their job in their own words, how they indicate what their biggest goals are that they're trying to achieve professionally, how they bring up what their biggest struggles and challenges are in their own words, not only because of what they explicitly describe in their profiles, but what you can infer by looking at content that they like, comment, and share that shows up in their feed over the last couple of weeks or over the last couple of months. And when you find consensus on that, it becomes a lot easier to aggregate all the data and figure out what the consensus is for the biggest goals and challenges among data center investors, data center ops people, as well as data center managers. So with that in mind, once you have that in mind, you'll be able to build an editorial calendar, a events calendar, where you're able to figure out what these three segments have in common. Those are your general sessions, your big keynotes, and where each of these segments has unique things that they need to learn for their jobs. Those are their breakout sessions. So more than likely what you're describing here with building community and events for data center investors, operations folks, and management folks, as you're talking about a conference with potentially a general track and 3 different subtracks of segments within that conference for people to attend that are unique to their profession, what they do within the data center industry. So that's the physical conference side. And more than likely, you're thinking, as I described this, that this has to be an offline conference. It doesn't. It actually could be a virtual conference, a virtual event, a virtual summit with the same basic approach, where there's general sessions that 100% of the audience would find super useful. And then there's breakout sessions for each of these types of job functions within the data center industry. So that's offline events, that's online events. You could also potentially run your own events, breakfast seminars, lunch and learns, symposias, similar kinds of educational events. And you can make a decision. Are these events small enough, relatively intimate events, 20, 30, 50 people, something like that, where you want to focus on one kind of buyer persona at a time? Or are they bigger events where you have a couple hundred people or a couple thousand people and you need to have general sessions and splitting up into tracks for most of the part of the day, and then bring the whole group back together twice a day for a big keynote throughout the conference? In terms of building community, it's the same basic approach. So if you're talking about discussion forums, there's a general discussion forum, there's probably a discussion forum, and potentially rituals and online events that are unique to the data center investors, the data center operations professionals, and the data center managers. So that's how I would approach first the programming side of it. Getting the programming side, providing value to each of these segments, is the most important part. Obviously, you need to make sure that you let people know that this exists. But if you don't provide value, if there's no reason for them to want to sign up for, register, and attend your events, or continue to drop by and participate and grow their career within your community, then, well, there's nothing to market and there's nothing to promote. In terms of creating awareness for this community and events business for these 3 segments, once that's done, I'd encourage you to go back to your buyer persona research. If you did a good job with your buyer personas, more than likely, not only did you get fantastic ideas for what the headline should be on the landing page and what the bullet points should be on the landing page to support that headline of what you're trying to do with your events business or community business, you more than likely also got some really detailed information on where they hang out online and offline. For example, at DCSMI, when we build out buyer personas, we identify all of the different LinkedIn groups that kind of buyer persona would most likely be a member of. Does that mean you should drop by each of those LinkedIn groups and spam that group with your event or community announcement? Probably not. You could selectively pick some groups that are hyper relevant. You could reach out to the group owner or the group admin and say, hey, I'm launching this new event, launching this new community. Would it be okay if I mention this in the group? That's probably the best way to approach it. In addition, you can also use LinkedIn Campaign Manager to run ads like sponsored posts or text ads or something like that on LinkedIn, specifically targeted to people that belong to those groups, and perhaps dialing in the targeting even more. Like you want people that belong to those groups that are in North America or Europe or Australia, wherever your conference and community is going to be. And you can even dial it in by the number of headcount employees in that particular company, the job function, whether you just want investment professionals, I think that would be under finance, as well as or information technology professionals. There's multiple ways to target, both with ads when it comes to members of a group, and overlaying other demographic information like their location, their company size, their job function, even their seniority level within the company. In addition to that, your buyer personas more than likely have skills endorsements. Those are when you look at someone's LinkedIn profile, this person has been endorsed X amount of times, 99 plus times, whatever it is, for data centers or digital infrastructure or cloud or something like that. You're able with LinkedIn ads, with LinkedIn Campaign Manager, to target things like sponsored posts and text ads specifically to those folks. You could also manually build a list of companies and contacts where your buyer personas, where your ideal client profile works, for specifically targeting members of those. And again, you can add and overlay additional targeting parameters. With the groups-based targeting, you can also use LinkedIn Sales Navigator to potentially do outbound. So if you said, I want to see a list in LinkedIn Sales Navigator of everyone that belongs to this particular LinkedIn group that's located in this particular country or this particular continent, and a company with this many employees that works in information technology or works in finance or something like that. So you'll get a list of that, and you could potentially do outbound. So there's a lot of different ways to be able to promote and grow and create awareness of that community and events business. But at the end of the day, it starts with getting crystal clear about who the ideal client profile is, the ICP is, in terms of where they're located, their company size, potentially an industry or business model identifier. And then within those companies, within the target account list, within the ideal client profile, what do you know about those three kinds of buyers that can inform all of your content and event strategy and all your awareness building, all your promotional strategy when it comes to all three of those kinds of stakeholders: the investor, the ops person, and the manager. Next question. This is a great one. We actually do quite a bit of consulting for companies like this as well. So how do we get data center relocation decision makers to respond without needing a warm introduction? So you have a moving business, you have a data center relocation business, sometimes the first cousin of a decommissioning business, but a lot of times they're standalone. Some companies just do decommissioning, some companies just do moving, relocation, some companies do both. So how do you get data center relocation decision makers to respond without needing a warm introduction? It's a terrific question. And the first thing to be aware of when it comes to building a sales, marketing, and go-to-market strategy for reaching relocation decision makers is to recognize that the way that people research and compare options and evaluate pricing today is so different to how it was like as recently as 10 years ago. 10 years ago, if you were building a data center moving company, data center relocation business, you more than likely got to spend about half of the buyer's journey, half of the sales cycle with your prospects, which wasn't ideal, but you still had a lot of time to educate and build trust with them and frame the argument for why your company is the best option for them by objectively pointing out advantages, pros, cons, helping to shape all of that criteria. Accelerate 10 years of digital transformation, coupled with a lot of baby boomers retiring and more Gen X and millennials being in decision making roles, and even Gen Z to a certain degree being in some decision making roles. And then add into that a couple of years of tens of millions of people working from home at the beginning of the 2020s. And we're now in a world where the self propelled buyer's journey, the self driven buyer's journey, has become the predominant buyer's journey. Like McKinsey, for example, found that 70 to 80% of decision makers now prefer a digital journey. What does that mean? Well, 10 years ago, you got to spend about 56% of the sales cycle, 56% of their buyer's journey with them. Today, they did, it was 56% before they found you. So actually take away from 100 and you got to spend, they did 56% on their own and you got to spend about 44% of the journey with them. Today, they do about 83% of self-propelled research on their own before they get to you. The game is 83% over before you even have a chance to meet prospects and clients. That means they're only spending, best case scenario, the final 17% of the research and decision-making process with you. And that's an enormous problem for companies in the relocation business, moving business, whatever it is, that have stuck to a really dated sales and marketing playbook, because that means you hardly have any time with your prospects and clients anymore. They've made up most of their mind before you even meet them. So this is an enormous challenge, but it's also a really big opportunity if you're the one that's able to get your foot in the door when everyone else sees a door that's been slammed shut. IT buyers, facilities buyers, any kind of technical buyer that has a considered purchase decision is more allergic to salespeople than they've ever been before in their career. You have to work extra hard to show up as a teacher, a trusted advisor, a consultant, a subject matter expert, maybe even a thought leader, to be able to earn your way in the early and middle stages of the buyer's journey. In the awareness stage of the buyer's journey, they know they have a goal or a challenge they're trying to figure out. In this particular case, they're moving or relocating a data center. In the middle of the buyer's journey, in the consideration stage, they're getting a little bit more specific about what they're calling things. They've kind of given this a name, and they're starting to weigh different ways they're trying to evaluate different ways to approach this move or relocation. They haven't gotten to the point yet where they're looking at individual companies, but they're looking at categories of different companies that potentially help them with this big project. The decision stage, that's the end of the buyer's journey. That's where, by default, if you're not doing much else, that's where you're likely going to get found if you get found at all. And that's not a good thing. Because what that means is someone else, some other company, has had a massive influence on how those prospects and clients are researching and comparing options and evaluating pricing. And almost certainly, the consultants, the teachers, the subject matter experts, the trusted advisors who got in there early and stayed with them often, teaching them, educating, and building trust, they're the ones that are able to have a dramatic impact on shaping the criteria that those prospects and clients use to evaluate all of their data center relocation and moving options. So a lot of times people instinctively think that, well, that's okay, they can come to me when they're ready to buy. No, the problem is if they come to you, if you only first meet them when they're ready to buy, it's too late. Short of severely undercutting the price and doing a money-losing deal, there's very little that you're going to do to shake those buyer preferences at that point, because someone else spent a lot of those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision with those prospects and clients. And they spent that time with them in the role of an educator, of a consultant, of a trusted advisor. And those 28 touch points are a really big deal in and around the data center industry, because not only, as I mentioned, by default, if you're not doing any of this, you're showing up in the decision stage. That's probably your whole website is optimized for people in that last 17% and ignoring the people that are in the first 83%. Not only that, you more than likely, if you haven't given this much thought and you're doing event marketing or field marketing, like you're exhibiting at big conferences, you can do a spectacular job at this big national conference and build great affinity with this person over the course of 2 or 3 days. And it could be because you did a booth. It could be because you spoke at a session or gave a keynote, or it could be that you sponsored a really nice cocktail party or a networking dinner or a golf tournament or something like that. And that's all awesome. But just recognize that that touch point counts for one touch point. Maybe if you did 2 or 3 independent things at the conference, maybe they count for 2 or 3, but there's still going to be 24, 25, 26 interactions that that prospect or client is going to have with someone in between when they start researching and when they ultimately make a purchase decision. So what ends up happening a lot of times is you get back from this conference and your team is giddy, you're really excited, you're exhausted, and you try a couple of times to set up a meeting. And eventually you get to setting up that meeting and you discover, yeah, this is an opportunity. You put something on the deal board. You have a projected close date. You have a projected deal amount. But the problem is, again, that person almost certainly is going to have 25, 26, 27, up to 28 different interactions, touch points that they're going to need before they ultimately purchase. So short of your selfish salesperson, old school salesperson, calling up and asking, are you ready to buy yet? When are you going to buy? When are you going to buy? When are you going to buy? Which we all know is going to burn your bridges. You need to get a lot more creative with ways to add value to their research and decision-making process. And this comes from pattern recognition of knowing how other stakeholders in other kinds of similar companies, similar company sizes, similar industries, similar locations, and similar job roles have researched and made their decision and evaluated the different options around data center moving and relocation. So it's not about your salesperson showing up and reading PowerPoints to them or reading the information that they can find on their own on their website or on social media or on a podcast or on a webinar. It's about your salesperson being such an expert about the intersection of your category and their category that it feels like free consulting, because you're able to not only anticipate what they're going to need to know next, but guide them throughout all of those 27, 28 steps in their buyer's journey. You're able to anticipate what they're going to want to do next and advise them on that by explaining, okay, we've worked with a lot of companies like yours. I've personally have helped 375 companies over the last 10 years plan their data center relocation, of which a couple dozen of them were in financial services companies, similar size to yours, similar locations. And these are typically the things that come up. Have you given much thought to how you're going to approach this issue and that issue? And when you start to see their jaws drop, that's when they humble up and they realize that, oh, wow, this person, this man, this woman really, really knows their stuff. They're not just an account executive. They're an expert on planning and coordinating and project managing this whole data center moving and relocation process. And that's where you get to the point where your prospects and clients actually want to spend time with your sales team, as opposed to your sales team having to constantly chase and beg for attention. And when you're able to successfully pull off that repositioning so that they see your AEs and your SDRs as like big four consultants, as if they were talking to someone that worked for PwC or EY or KPMG or Deloitte or Accenture or Kyndryl or something like that, when you're able to successfully change that positioning so they truly are showing up as an expert as opposed to an account executive or an SDR or BDR. So they like that game-changing impact for being able to not need those warm introductions, because you're using expertise, you're using educational resources, you're using educational events that add value to their professional lives to do the warming up. So you're not having to cling to this dinosaur definition of hiring a door opener. And when I say dinosaur definition, I'm being kind. It's about as kind as I can possibly be. The notion of paying someone to make an introduction to you that hasn't personally used your company and is getting paid to do an introduction for you, it is not a door opener. I don't know what to call it, but it is for sure. For a sophisticated buyer, they will see through that person is just another form of salesperson for you, because they get paid by your sales team. The kind of warm introductions that really matter is where you take 20 people to a football game or a baseball game or a golf tournament, and 4 of those 20 people are clients that have done their moves and relocations with you for a decade or more, and they love what you do. And the other 16 people are potential clients. And you don't even have to ask them. The magic happens. And the clients that love your company will convince a huge percentage of the other 16 people that, wow, yeah, they're the ones. So there's a lot of different ways to approach this, but it's super important to recognize that the way that people research and make their purchase decisions has dramatically changed. Your likelihood, by default, if you don't do anything special, you're going to be very marginalized. You're not going to be spending much of the buyer's journey, much of the sales cycle with your best prospects anymore. And even if you do get to spend time with them, it may already be too late. So the way that you earn your way in with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, is to repackage and reposition the value proposition that your AEs, that your account executives, your account managers, your sales development, your business development reps provide to your prospects and clients, so that they're truly providing educational value. So it seems more like free consulting that helps them figure out how they're going to close the gaps to achieve their goals of a successful data center relocation move, and eliminate sources of stress that are driving them nuts, that are causing them to miss out on time off that they need to recharge the batteries, nice and weekends, time away from their loved ones. And the better job that you can do of providing value at that elite world-class level, the more you're going to realize that that is the new warm introduction. Educating and building trust at scale with a specific kind of ideal client profile and specific kinds of buyer personas within those target accounts, that's the new warm introduction. Next question up is, how do we market and sell data center construction projects? How do we market and sell data center construction projects? Well, compared to most other types of sales opportunities within the data center ecosystem, it doesn't get much bigger and more at stake most of the time than massive data center construction projects. And because of that, the value of having a strong company brand and professional brand is exceptionally high. The value of the liability of having a crappy company brand and a crappy professional brand, it's a massive, massive liability, because in most cases, these are multi-year processes, planning processes, and decision-making processes before they sign on. That said, among all of the different parts of the data center ecosystem, when we think of data center operators, technology and facilities companies, real estate related companies, outsourced sales and marketing companies, the construction companies, and to a lesser degree, the real estate companies, are the ones that are clinging to the dated playbook with the most outrageously tight grip that is imaginable, incredibly resistant to change. And it's crazy because the companies that they're selling to and the buyer personas that they're targeting have already shown that when they interact with all different kinds of companies in and around the data center ecosystem, they're already showing strong preferences for that self-propelled buyer's journey. You know, you're trying to reach a CEO, you're trying to reach a construction manager, you're trying to reach an entrepreneur, you're trying to reach an ESG person, you're trying to reach the CEO of another company that you potentially would contract with, you're trying to reach a managing partner of a private equity firm, whatever it is. When you do your buyer persona research on that particular person's preferences, what their biggest professional goals are, that if they get right, get them a huge promotion and a mega bonus, what their biggest struggles and challenges and stressors are, where they hang out online and offline, you are almost certainly going to discover that that person has strong self-propelled buyer's journey preferences with how they interact with every other part of the data center ecosystem besides construction and real estate. So if you want to give yourself a competitive advantage, it's important to lean into how this research and comparing options and poll-driven process actually happens today, as opposed to how it happened 10 or 20 years ago. So when you discover that your buyers not only like to go to conferences, but they also listen to podcasts and watch YouTube videos and go to webinars and are super active on LinkedIn, and they're asking questions all day long among their peers on social media and sometimes in private Slack channels, and they're influenced by online reviews. All of these should be rolled into how you approach marketing and selling big data center construction projects. But the problem is there's a lot of people in leadership roles in these companies that believe that they're so special that the only differentiation they need to worry about is the post-purchase differentiation, or the differentiation that happens at the absolute last 17% of the buyer's journey, at the absolute last part of the whole bidding process and decision-making process. The reality, though, is your brand is no longer just about your logos and your hexadecimal colors and your fonts. Your brand is now everything that the industry says about your company and your leadership team when you're not in the room. And given that you're hardly in the room anymore throughout most of the buyer's journey, and if you're lucky, you'll get to spend the last 17% of that buyer's journey in the room, it is incredibly important that your educational content, your educational events, your thought leadership, your resources stand in for what used to happen in one-on-one conversations. Because there is an exceptionally high likelihood that the same kind of prospects and clients, regardless of whether we're talking about other construction companies, private equity investors, construction managers, CEOs of operators, whoever it is where you think you're going to be most successful, there is an exceptionally high likelihood that for every time you are asked a question face-to-face or on a phone call or in a Zoom meeting or at a conference, that exact person is going to LinkedIn and YouTube and Google and Claude and Perplexity and Copilot and ChatGPT and Bing, and they are asking the exact same question. And whoever shows up near the top of that list has an enormous opportunity to get in there early and get in there often and be seen as the go-to expert in your space. And if they're able to repeatedly make that kind of interaction or that touch point stick, that person, that company can have a massive impact on how that stakeholder compares their available options that are in front of them, how they navigate the whole pre-construction, planning, permitting process, zoning, all of that stuff, how that comes up. So it is vital for you and your company to figure out a way for you to get in the right places at the right time with the right people, and most of all, in the right context. And for most companies that do construction, this is such a massive culture change that unless you're from a huge company with tens of thousands of employees, this really needs to start as a top-down initiative where someone in a very senior leadership position, an executive position on your company, puts out a mandate that says, look, okay, this is a whole new culture. This is a whole new brand. We spent a lot of money rebranding the company. And as a result, we are now determined to be seen in the marketplace as the definitive go-to experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with these kinds of data center construction projects. We're going to upskill our internal teams. We're going to have a great internal training and onboarding and mentoring program. And we're going to publish and promote the most amazingly helpful educational resources and educational events to take a strong and decisive lead in this space. And in an enterprise company, this will probably end up, the internal champion might be a chief commercial officer or chief revenue officer. And a small to mid-sized company with a couple dozen or a few hundred employees, your CEO needs to be leading the charge on this, because this is so core to your company's future and its growth and its differentiation and its profitability and what it stands for. This is a huge part of being able to recruit the right and retain the right talent as well, and recruit and retain the right subcontractors as well. It's all related. And almost certainly you're going to need a similar approach with your external stakeholders that have now an increasingly massive impact on construction projects. Your regulators, your utility companies, your elected officials. These are all really important buyer personas to be educating and building trust with about these construction projects. So if this is core enough, that you get the buy-in from the CEO, and your CEO says, great, we're going to have an all hands meeting twice a month about this. And they're going to drop in for 20 or 30 minutes to talk about why this is so core. If you can't get that 20 or 30 minutes on their calendar twice a month to be waving the flag and driving home the critical importance of this to your company's brand, it's going to be an extraordinarily uphill battle. Because especially in the construction and real estate segments of the data center industry, these are not the early adopters. In most cases, the operators and the technology companies have been doing most of these investments at scale for the better part of a decade. The real estate and construction companies have been, in many cases, fighting this kicking and screaming. Some of the big real estate companies in this space, like CBRE and JLL, publish amazing thought leadership research that leads the way about like vacancy, occupancy, growth rates, and everything like that. But after that, there tends to be a really sharp fall off when it comes to small and mid-sized companies in the real estate space. And in the construction space, you probably find a couple of reasonably good examples, but culturally, these are really, really big changes. And not addressing them are a really big vulnerability for your company. Closing the gaps and changing the culture so that your company is seen as the definitive go-to experts can provide game-changing opportunities, growth opportunities for your company across all of the different kinds of stakeholders, the potential clients, potential talent, and as I mentioned just a few moments ago, even external stakeholders that can have a dramatic impact on construction projects like elected officials, utility companies, and regulators. So those are my thoughts on how to market and sell major data center construction projects. Obviously, smaller data center construction projects can probably do a subset of this and it gets a little bit easier. But again, these are huge, huge projects, and sometimes they're capital constrained. A lot of times they're power constrained. Sometimes they're margin constrained. But either way, it's really important to modernize how you're going about marketing and selling these kinds of massive projects going forward.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Hey there, it's Joshua Feinberg back here again from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And you are watching our weekly live stream Q&A show, the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest questions that we're hearing about, the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about throughout the global data center ecosystem. Next question up for this week is, how do we reposition data center sales reps as consultants throughout the entire sales cycle? How do we reposition data center sales professionals as consultants throughout the entire sales cycle? Yeah, this is a fabulous question. And it's never been more important to address this issue, because we now live in a world where most prospects and clients, when it comes to anything and everything related to considered data center purchases, have become more sales allergic than ever. It used to be 10 years ago that sales professionals would spend about half of the sales cycle, about half of the buyer's journey, with their best prospects and clients. At the time, CEB, the Corporate Executive Board, that's now a part of Gartner, found that about 56% of a typical buyer's journey was over before sales contact. Add in 10 years of digital transformation, a few years at the start of the 2020s with millions, tens of millions of people working from home during the pandemic, add in some significant retirement of baby boomers and more Gen X decision makers, millennial decision makers, even some Gen Z decision makers. And we've now arrived at this place where the self-propelled, the self-driven buyer's journey has become the predominant buyer's journey. So much so that 83% of the sales cycle, 83% of a typical buyer's journey is now over before sales contact. And this isn't just edge cases, this isn't just outliers. McKinsey found, and we continue to validate, that the overwhelming majority, 70, 80, 90% of decision makers now prefer a virtual, self-propelled digital buyer's journey. So with that in mind, what is the future of sales? The future of data center sales is going to look a lot more like consulting. What does that mean? Oh, you don't necessarily need to go immediately into your LinkedIn profile and email signature and business card and come up with a better synonym for account executive or sales or SDR, or sales development rep, or BDR, business development rep, or account manager. But without a doubt, the sales professional going forward will look a lot more like a big four consultant. Like they're providing such incredibly valuable, unique insights to their prospects and clients that it'll feel like free consulting, and consulting that's so good that they might have paid in a different context $500 or $1,000 an hour, or your local currency equivalent, to engage someone from like KPMG or EY or PwC or Deloitte or something like that, something along those lines. And your account managers post-purchase, your customer success managers post-purchase, will look like the MBA, the Master's in Business Administration, or PhD, the doctoral version of that big four consultant. Because what it largely comes down to is there really is no reason for your prospects and clients anymore to show up for you to read them information that they can find on their own on your website. There's no reason to read them PowerPoint, Google, or Canva slides. There's no value in that anymore. Where there is unique value is being able to diagnose before you describe, being able to explore before you advise. Where there's incredible value is where you specialize members of your sales team so that they develop very deep expertise at the intersection of your business model and your buyer persona's business model and job function. So, for example, if you are in data center sales for a data center operator that provides, for example, colocation or hyperscale, it may make sense to specialize in such a way that you're only selling to financial services companies and mid-market financial services companies in your particular country that have, say, anywhere from 200 to 1,000 employees. Because in those companies, you're going to get to figure out real quickly what the org chart looks like in the IT organization. You'll know what the C-level involvement is. You'll know what the VPs look like. You'll know what the directors look like. You'll know what's going on in operations. You'll know what's going on in cybersecurity and infrastructure and engineering. And you'll know who the typical external channel partners are. And you'll know all of this because you start to have pattern recognition. Because after you've spoken with a few dozen or a few hundred of IT decision makers in these mid-market financial services companies in your geographic region, you will for sure become an expert at helping them navigate this journey. So much to the point that those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision, they're going to want to spend a lot of those touch points with members of your sales team because they no longer perceive your AE, your account executive, as a sales professional. They perceive that person as a domain expert at the intersection of colocation and hyperscale and financial services for a mid-market company in that geographic region. And because you've been through this so many times, you know where all the potholes are. You know where the forks in the road are. You know where the quicksand is. You know how to be a fantastic world-class project manager at helping your internal champion rally the troops and get alignment across teams. And when you're able to operate at that world-class level, that is what the future of data center sales looks like, where data center sales reps are operating more as consultants than just transaction-focused sales professionals. And this is an especially interesting, unique opportunity for onboarding and upskilling people that are relatively early on in their career. And it can also be an equally big challenge for people that are later on in their career if they're resistant to change. There's also a lot of people that are mid-career that are resistant to change. So I don't want to overgeneralize by generations here. The reality is the members of your sales team with decades of experience in this space have ridiculous amounts of institutional knowledge that needs to be repackaged and repositioned with that person showing up as the expert, as the consultant, as the teacher, as the trusted advisor, and perhaps even the thought leader. And for the more junior members of your sales organization, a lot of times they'll be slotted into SDR, BDR kind of roles. They're the tour guide. They're the concierge. They are the coordinator that helps folks in those accounts understand the fantastic internal resources that your company brings to the table when it comes to navigating colocation or hyperscale for mid-market financial services companies in your particular region. But everyone, make no mistake, everyone needs to be supporting this initiative of your company deciding that it wants to be seen as the definitive experts about anything and everything having to do with colocation or hyperscale that's used by mid-market financial services companies in your region. These are massive culture changes. A lot of companies go kicking and screaming into this. And one of the bigger jobs of your C-level leadership is to create a culture to facilitate making these kinds of changes happen. Because 10 years ago, these changes were optional. And actually, in the data center ecosystem, in most cases, it was the operators and the technology companies that were the early adopters. But in many cases now, you have companies in this space that have been doing world-class elite levels of educational content and thought leadership and educational events for the better part of a decade. I know because I've been up on stage at major industry conferences, and I have put up job descriptions from some of the biggest data center operators in the space to show them bullet point by bullet point what world-class looks like on these teams. So if you are serious about what repositioning looks like to helping your sales teams reinvent themselves, it's important to get realistic and self-aware about where your company is with its branding today and where it is not, where your individual professionals and your teams are with their own professional brands and where they're not. And set up a strategy and prioritize what you're going to do to close those gaps so that your sales teams are successfully able to show up as the definitive teachers, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, and consultants in your space. Because when that happens, you don't need a whole extra layer of your company spending time begging for meetings. It's actually the other way around. Instead of your SDRs and your AEs doing tons of cold prospecting, begging for time on the calendar, you get your prospects and clients coming to you and wanting to spend time with your internal experts, because the impact that they are having on your prospects and clients' businesses is without doubt incredibly powerful. And the sooner you can create that environment, the better all of this works. So that's how I would approach repositioning data center sales reps as consultants throughout the entire sales cycle. And it's not just at the end, it's throughout the awareness and the consideration and the decision stages, throughout as many of those 28 touch points as possible between complete stranger and purchase decision. Next question up is, how do we market and sell IT asset disposition, ITAD, as well as data center relocation and infrastructure services? So your company has like 3 lines of business. More than likely, you're selling it to the same kind of client that's just at a different life cycle stage of what they need from your company. So your company markets and sells IT asset disposition, ITAD, as well as data center relocation and data center infrastructure services. So what I'd first tell you is, because this sounds like this is a pretty mature, established business where you're way beyond the stage of having to worry about product market fit or achieving go-to-market fit, I would tell you to go to the case studies page on your website, go to the logos, and figure out what do those companies have in common, where you have been most successful of being able to sell one or more of those services to your clients: asset disposition, relocation, and infrastructure. What kinds of companies have gotten the most value from working with your company over an extended period of time, where they've had a fantastic onboarding experience, where they've gotten initial value, intended value, extended value, and they're such big fans of your company that they're now singing your praises, both and case studies and testimonials when they come to your events. They're like an extension of your sales team. You cross-pollinate those folks that love your company so much with potential future clients, and magic happens. So with that in mind, we're looking for what those companies have in common. Where are they located geographically? Can you be effective with ITAD and relocation infrastructure on a global basis? Or is it only in a certain continent or only in a certain country of groups of countries? So let's get real specific about your geographic portion of your ideal client profile among your addressable market. Let's also get really specific about their company size, the range of employee headcount, company sizes where you can be most successful with your asset disposition and your relocation and your infrastructure services. Because it's probably not in the same way that unless you have a huge company, you're probably not able to sell and service globally. You're probably not going to be super effective at 100% of company sizes either. How big do they need to be to afford your minimums? Does that knock out 1 to 10 employees? Does that knock out 1 to 50 employees? Does that knock out 1 to 200 employees? Only you can answer that by knowing what your minimums are. And along the same lines, at the extreme upper end of the range, is your company really in a position where you can serve Fortune 500 companies for asset disposition and relocation and infrastructure services, like 10,000 plus employees? If you are, that's great. Give yourself a pat on the back. And maybe you have a minimum for what you do with your targeting and your outbound and your qualification, but you don't have a ceiling. For most companies, more than likely it's Goldilocks. Not too big, not too small, just right. And what is just right for those kinds of companies? Based on working with similar kinds of companies, I would guess probably 50 employees at about 5 or 10 million US or your local currency equivalent as the floor, and the ceiling might be 5,000 employees or even 1,000 employees before it gets crazy complicated. That still gives you a huge addressable market, total addressable market, and a really good starting point for your ideal client profile. I also would encourage you to not just think about the geography and the employee headcount. I would encourage you to think about industries and business models. Among your logos, among your case studies, what do they have in common? Do you do especially well with manufacturing companies or financial services companies or healthcare companies or e-commerce companies? Only you can, again, answer that question. But I would encourage you, if you can get those 3 components, those 3 parameters documented in your simple one-page ideal client profile, geography, company size, and industry, it makes it massively easier to develop positioning and differentiation that really resonates. And from there, once you have that documented, you'll be able to build out a target account list to power your account-based marketing, your account-based selling. This is going to be anywhere from a couple dozen. It could be as many as a couple thousand. In most cases, usually it's a couple hundred target companies that you'd split up among your sales team to focus on building very, very, very deep efforts at educating and building trust among those perfect client accounts, because you've perfectly handpicked them as being similar enough to where you've been most successful. They line up perfectly with your ideal client profile. And because the unit economics, the lifetime value, the average customer client value is so outrageously high, there's practical limits on what you might invest, but you can afford to invest quite a bit in marketing and sales resources, in creating awareness and educating and building trust with the most important kinds of stakeholders within those companies. So we've gotten you a good, well-documented single-page ideal client profile. We now have a great account-based marketing target account list that at the minimum would be in a spreadsheet, but more than likely is probably sitting in your CRM, your customer relationship management system. From there, we need to understand the individual people that you need to be building relationships with in these companies to successfully market and sell asset disposition, relocation, and infrastructure services. And again, this is going to vary by your business model and your capabilities and where you've been most successful, but we call these buyer personas. A buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of an ideal stakeholder based on actual research and some select educated speculation. And the actual research is incredibly important. You can't just pull this stuff out of thin air. You need to actually talk to representative people in each of these segments. Face-to-face is ideal. Video meetings would be the second best. If you can't get access to either of those, at the absolute minimum, do a survey, look at what they have in common in their CRM records, pull up a stack of those people's LinkedIn profiles and look at the commonalities for their goals and their challenges, take the same names and company names of those same people, go to a simple search and look at the first 5 or 10 pages, the results that come up, and try to infer at the intersection of how they describe themselves on their LinkedIn profile and the kind of content that they comment on and reshare and that they interact with, that kind of content and events. Look for the commonalities, and then also overlay what you find on search results for that particular person. Are they quoted in trade journals? Do they speak at conferences? Can you watch a YouTube video? Is there a news release? Their own words, incredibly important. Not what you think their words are, but what their own words actually are. Getting their own words correct is the difference between a headline on a landing page resonating and falling completely flat. So we can't guess here. We need to get their own words. And when it comes to those buyer personas, I want you to prioritize. The most important kind of stakeholder, that's going to be your primary buyer persona. The second most important kind of person that shows up on the decision committee, that's going to be your secondary buyer persona. And in some cases, in enterprise accounts, there may be a tertiary kind of buyer persona. Over time, you'll also likely discover that there's a certain kind of person that can show up and be a detractor, that can totally derail your deal. That becomes a negative buyer persona. That's important because you can set up drop-down lists on the forums on your website. And if that person picks the selection that puts them in the category of being a negative buyer persona, well, your salesperson won't spend time with them. Along the same lines, if you're doing ads like LinkedIn ads using LinkedIn Campaign Manager, you can for sure exclude that kind of person if you know their particular job function or some other attribute with them, or even just have a manually built list of individual people or individual companies to stay away from, which, by the way, is also great for excluding competitors. In addition to LinkedIn Campaign Manager, the exclusion kind of information can also be really helpful in LinkedIn Sales Navigator, that also supports being able to include and exclude on certain attributes. So we have your ideal client profile. We have a target account list. We've identified and we've researched the buyer personas that are most important to educate and build trust with. Now we're going to go back to those buyer personas, and one by one, we need to build a content and an event strategy that allows us to educate and build trust at scale with the most important kinds of stakeholders that show up on these decision committees. And we're going to use the consensus on their biggest goals that get them a big promotion and their biggest challenges that are stressing them out to no end and causing them to lose sleep and all kinds of negative work-life balance kind of problems. We're going to use the consensus on that to create amazingly helpful premium content and podcasts and YouTube videos and planning guides and events and event series and webinars and streams and podcasts and all this other great stuff that's going to allow our company to be seen as the definitive go-to experts on anything and everything having to do with asset disposition, relocation, and infrastructure for this kind of stakeholder in a certain kind of company. So when it comes to marketing and selling IT asset disposition and data center relocation and data center infrastructure services, we need to recognize and respect the fact that most of our best prospects and clients that 10 years ago would have had tons of conversations with our sales team are really not very interested in talking with our sales team anymore until they're almost ready to buy. In order for our sales team, in order for our marketing team to earn their way back into those conversations, we need to show up as the teachers, as the subject matter experts, as the consultants, and as the trusted advisors. And in order to do that, not only do we need to have deep expertise so we can deliver a lot of value, we first need to dig into what is top of mind for our primary buyer persona, what is top of mind for our secondary buyer persona. And then we need to have the focus and the persistence and the perseverance to deliver insane amounts of value to each of those kinds of people throughout their full buyer's journey, not just at the decision stage, but early on and in the middle, and awareness when they just know they have a big goal that they're trying to figure out or a big challenge that they're trying to figure out a solution to. In the middle, where they're starting to compare the different approaches they could take. And at the decision stage, when they finally start to look at individual companies. So respect the fact that the predominant buyer's journey is now self-propelled. Typically, there's 25 to 30. 28 is like the most commonly cited stat on for the number of touch points that someone will have between complete stranger and purchase decision. And it is in your best interest to make sure that you and your team have massive surface area coverage of as many of those 28 touch points as possible. So you're seeing by the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, so that you and your team and your company are seen as the definitive go-to experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with IT asset disposition, data center relocation, and data center infrastructure services. Before we head down the home stretch and address this week's final question, I just want to make sure to give you a quick heads up that if you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational events like this and resources for data center go-to-market professionals throughout the full data center ecosystem, make sure that you're subscribed to our data center sales and marketing newsletter that comes every Sunday to your email inbox. You can subscribe directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. And that brings us to our final question for this week, which is, how does a colocation and network services company generate more channel partner leads? How does a company that's principally in the business of colocation and network services generate more channel partner leads? I love that question because I have spent a huge part of my career at the intersection of colocation, managed services, IT services, and channel partner programs. And I've had the opportunity to work with all three categories of professional services companies that provide outsourced services to small and medium-sized businesses. You more than likely are most familiar with the IT version of that, the managed service provider that acts as a fractional CTO and outsourced IT department for small and medium-sized businesses. You may also be familiar with the accounting and finance version of that, a CPA or a certified public accountant or chartered accountant or outsourced accounting firm or bookkeeping firm that provides fractional CFO services, fractional outsourced bookkeeping services to small and medium-sized businesses. And you may also be familiar with the third category of professional services company that provides outsourced services to small and medium-sized businesses, the marketing agency or the PR agency that serves as the fractional CMO, the fractional chief marketing officer. So the reason I bring this up is I am both fascinated and frustrated at the same time of how few companies have figured out that they're targeting the exact same small and medium-sized businesses. In other words, by simply merging one or more of these business models together, unit economics improve dramatically. And there have been, to their credit, there have been some large accounting firms in the United States and globally who have successfully integrated two or three of these categories under the same roof or virtual roof under the same company brand. Usually the accounting firms might start, it's a natural thing that they'll do like a SOC, like compliance services for companies in and around the data center industry. So the first cousin of that might be offering cybersecurity services. Some of them actually provide full-on managed services. Some of them get involved in enterprise resource planning, ERP software, and CRM, customer relationship managing software. So depending on the nature of the accounting firm, some of them can have a pretty diverse menu of IT-related services. And some of them also decide to get into the digital marketing business. They'll start by doing simple ads management, conversion rate optimization, lead generation, content marketing, video production, typically by acquisition. The cool part for all of these companies is there's a massive amount of commonalities. Why do I bring this up? Because it's shocking to me how many small co-location operators struggle with growth because they decide that they're going to stay a single co-location company and they don't rent space in someone else's facility, and they ignore what's right under their nose. What's right under their nose is the reason that they usually win is because of local proximity. The reason the local managed service provider wins is also because of local proximity. Exact same client base, only slightly different menu of services. Matter of fact, in the early 2010s, the reason I started learning about co-location data centers is because I had worked with IT services companies and IT consulting and MSPs for the better part of 15 years. And I saw so many of them struggling to make the leap from client server premise-based IT to public cloud and SaaS. And the ones that weren't struggling made a definitive decision to go in one of three directions. Either they moved up market into mid-market companies and became an ERP expert, enterprise resource planning. Some of them decided they wanted to be software developers, so they started building web apps and mobile apps. And a third category where I predominantly ended up, although I had exposure in all of these areas, is an infrastructure as a service. This is where they went really deep, and They started with taking a server and putting it in a colocation facility, and they rented out slices of that to their existing fractional IT, fractional CTO kind of clients. Or in some cases, they had a really progressive, forward-thinking client who came back from the hospitality conference or the manufacturing conference, and they said, we don't really know what this means, but we need to co-locate a server. You're our outsourced CTO. You go figure out what this means. Just tell us what it's going to cost. We'll sign off on it. You take care of all the provisioning and the managing, and this is gonna be your baby doll. So that was my first brush. And for the first year or two that I was involved in the space, I understood managed services and cybersecurity and colocation pretty well, but it took me a while to understand the full ecosystem and the 50 to 55 different business models that exist in and around the data center ecosystem. It's actually pretty fragmented, which is part of the reason why I tell most people that are new to this space, you need like a hop on, hop off bus tour, or like a concierge to kind of give you the quick ride around the theme park to introduce you to the 5 different sectors of the data center ecosystem, across like operators, tech, facilities, construction, real estate, outsourced sales and marketing. And then the few dozen or so kinds of business models that exist within those broader categories. So why do I bring all of this up? Because when it comes to a co-location and network services company that wants to generate more channel partner leads, they need to be very well aware of what they are and what they aren't, where they win and where they don't win. Because especially when it comes to co-location companies, it's very common to find data center operators that also offer managed services. Like it will be in the headline on their homepage, or a box on their homepage, or a separate page on their homepage that talks about the managed services that they provide as a co-location data center operator. So that's a potential problem for a channel partner that actually is a managed service provider. So you need to get crystal clear about that point of demarcation, about what you do as a co-location operator, what you do as a network services company, and what you would potentially want to partner with others about. And I would this is an exercise that I've been doing for the better part of a decade. It literally take 2 columns on a marker board, 2 columns in a spreadsheet, and decide what they do and what you do. And make it crystal clear, because that for sure is going to need to be in the channel partner recruitment page on your website as part of like, here's what we do, here's where we're looking for channel partners to fill these gaps. The second part of it is to recognize that large data center operators in most cases have more than one category of channel partners. And depending on your resources, your business model, what you're pursuing in terms of growth goals, you may decide that you want more than one category of channel partner, and you'd potentially have different compensation models for different kinds of channel partners. Third, I would also recommend that you become, if needed, very self-aware about the nature of how strong or how weak your channel partner brand is in the marketplace. At one extreme, if you are a channel account manager for Digital Realty or Equinix, you're not going to have to work really hard to explain to a managed service provider who Digital Realty or Equinix is, or who NTT is, or because they already have very strong global brand name recognition. If you own a co-location data center with 5 or 10 employees, that's a single location that has been around for 10 or 15 years and has low 7-figure kind of revenue, and a couple hundred SMB clients in your facility, well, you're going to have to work quite a bit harder to educate and build trust and attract channel partners. Second, there's really a couple of different parts of having a successful channel partner program. There is the recruitment, there is the onboarding, and then there's the continual activation. And a lot of companies mistakenly believe, if they're new to this, that they're going to magically recruit a commission-only sales team or a complete variable cost service provider. The reality is, when it comes to recruiting channel partners, you are almost certainly not going to be the only company that they've partnered with. What does that mean? Say you're a small co-location operator with a single location and you're partnering with small managed service providers. You have 15 or 20 employees, they have 5 or 10 employees. Rest assured, they have a couple dozen clients, and they may literally have a couple dozen channel partner relationships. So what that means is when they actually have time to work on cultivating these relationships, you are sharing their schedule, their attention, their mind process to being able to wrap their mind around understanding how this can help their clients with potentially 10, 15, 20 other channel partners programs that they participate in. So you got to work hard to provide value and differentiate yourself and earn your way onto their calendar. And you do this in the same way you would approach this with any other kind of market segment, by starting with getting really specific on an ideal client profile that essentially is your ideal partner profile. Where are these partners located geographically? How many employees do these partners have? And are there certain specializations that these partners might have in terms of their industry focus that would align especially well with our unique capabilities? So that's your ideal partner profile, like kind of the first cousin of an ideal client profile. From there, you should be able to build out a target account list of target partners that you want to build relationships with, that you could potentially recruit as your next channel partners. And depending on how big your company is, how tightly defined, there may be anywhere from a couple dozen to a couple hundred, maybe even significantly more than that, of companies that would be a perfect channel partner for your company. And then you want to figure out within those companies who the perfect person is that you need to get a foot in the door with. And more than likely, there'll be a very different answer depending on their company size. A 5 to 10 person MSP, like for sure, the owner, the CEO. The good part, though, is any foot in the door with that company, even a part-time contractor or intern, will know exactly who to send you in the direction of. We'll know exactly where to pass that resource along to. And that's not a given when you're partnering with massive channel partner companies. So the larger they are, the more specific you need to be about the job roles and dialing in the buyer personas. The smaller they are, the easier it is to get to the right person. Obviously, the bigger they are, the more upside there could be with bringing more clients and more revenue and more growth. And probably they can also afford to pay a little bit more attention to you because they're not running in 20 different directions at once all the time. The smaller they are, the good part is they're winning for the same as a local single location MSP, a local single location colo provider. You're both winning for the same reasons. Your clients love the proximity. They love being able to get directly to the owner, and they know with the big guys, they're just not going to get that. So those are some thoughts those are some things to think about as you're starting to put together your channel partner strategy. That's the recruiting side. Then once they're like, oh yeah, this sounds pretty good, we'll be your channel partner. You need an onboarding process in the same way you would onboard a member of your sales team or onboard a new system engineer. You need to think about what resources you need to provide, what kind of new channel partner orientation onboarding experience you want them to have to get excited about the opportunity to now be working with your company in a sales and services capacity for colocation and network services. And then once that initial onboarding happens, then you first need to support them and stay with them on a regular basis and figure out among their existing client list where you can potentially help the most. And it is a balancing act, a balancing beam, a tightrope walk, whatever you want to call it, between staying in front of them and staying in front of them too much to the point that you're annoying them and pissing them off and essentially shooting yourself in the foot. So you need to figure out what that balance is, because of course your channel account managers will have revenue goals that they're working on, but at the same time, these relationships that you're nurturing with your channel partners should be looked at with a multi-year time horizon. In some cases, it can take 6 months to a year to get them to bring their first deal to you because they're super freaking nervous. One of the only ways that you can get them to calm their nerves a little bit is to potentially introduce them to other channel partners who've been really successful with your program, either through case study interviews, through live events, a combination of the two. But just recognize there's certain parts of channel partner ecosystems where the owners are ridiculously paranoid about talking with each other, like to the point where they don't even want the others to know that they exist. So your mileage may vary, but keep that in the back of your mind. But yeah, understand that early on, until you've proven yourself to them and their clients, they're going to keep you on a really, really short leash. And because of that, you need to be patient about ramp time. Once you've won that loyalty, it's very likely that they stay with you forever, for several years, or until their business had some kind of exit milestone or something like that. But understand, again, when you hire a full-time account executive, when you hire a full-time solutions engineer, they work for you 40 hours a week. Their attention is not divided in 10 or 20 different directions. When you recruit a channel partner to do sales and services for your company, their attention by definition is going in 10, 20 or more different directions. So keep all of that in mind as you look to grow out and build your channel partner program. I would also encourage you, if you're relatively new to this, is to do some competitive analysis, some competitive benchmarking of other channel partner programs that your channel partners are likely to already be participating in. This could be large national or global channel partnership programs. This could be regional. It could even be local. The reality is the hyper-local channel partner programs, I find, are like Sasquatch. Why do I say that? Most companies, when they say they're looking for partners, what they're really trying to do is to figure out a way to get a commission-only salesperson that works for them 20, 30, 40 hours a week that they only have to pay when they close. The reality of being able to find someone effective who's willing to agree to that kind of deal is like spotting Bigfoot, spotting the Yeti, spotting the Loch Ness Monster. It might exist, but the reality is it's a very competitive data center ecosystem, a very competitive colocation network services business. So be aware among the channel partners that you are looking to recruit what other channel programs they participate in. This is something that for sure should show up when you're doing your buyer persona research. And again, regardless of whether this is the CEO figuring this out, your CRO, your chief commercial officer, your head of sales figuring this out, if you're fortunate enough to have the resources to have a channel chief, for certain, they'll need to be figuring this out. But yeah, just become aware, make yourself aware of who the other players are in your space, who the other programs are that your channel partners are likely to be participating in, and make sure you've thought through what they're used to, what they accept as normal, and figure out how your company is going to fit in to earning your way onto their calendar, earning your way into their client base that they guard, like that they're tremendously guarded about. And that's, again, the reason why early on expect it to go slow before you build up momentum. So that's how I would approach how a colocation and network services company can generate more channel partner leads, is play the long game, lead with education and trust building. They need to see, your channel partners need to see that you provide a next level of expertise that they don't have internally. So you're providing a huge amount of free consulting and free education and training as part of this. Obviously, as you get to be a huge company, you can eventually charge for some of these things, like joining a channel partner program and having aggressive minimums and things like that. But early on, you got to win them over. Education and trust building are incredibly important. And there almost certainly is some unique expertise on your bench that would be incredibly valuable for your channel partners to be able to get access to on some kind of regular basis. So this is how you get to, product market fit, go to market fit. This is how you get to channel partner market fit. That's how I would approach how a co-location and network services company can generate more channel partner leads. So that's the final question that we'll have time to address in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream. Again, I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI. We're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. If you got great value from today's show, make sure that you hit the like button and add a comment. Share it with a colleague who can benefit. And make sure you subscribe to our Data Center Sales Marketing newsletter at www.dcsmi.com. Until next time, I wish you great success in growing your role, your team's role, and your company's influence in the growth of the data center industry. Take care now and enjoy the rest of your week. See you back again next time.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com. DCSMI.com.